What if the history you were taught in school left out the most important parts? What if the real story of America wasn't just about presidents, battles, and glory, but about the people who were crushed, erased, and silenced? This is the version of America you didn't read in textbooks. This is Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. Howard Zinn wasn't your average historian. Born in Brooklyn, a shipyard worker turned Air Force bombardier in World War II. He witnessed destruction firsthand. But after the war, something changed. He began to question the stories he was taught. The clean-cut versions of history didn't match the bloody reality he'd seen. So he became a teacher and then a rebel with a chalkboard. His mission: to rewrite American history from the perspective of those left-out Native Americans, slaves, poor farmers, women, laborers, immigrants, the people who didn't have power, but often paid the price for those who did.
Welcome to Find the Stories. Please subscribe to the channel, like, share, and comment to support the channel.
Most history books tell the story of America like a highlight reel of presidents, generals, and rich white men. Zinn flips that. He calls it history from below. Imagine telling the story of a house not through its architects, but through the bricklayers, janitors, and people forced to live in its basement. Instead of glorifying Columbus, Zinn exposes how his arrival led to the mass murder of Native Americans. Instead of celebrating Andrew Jackson, he tells the truth about the Trail of Tears. It's not comfortable, but it's real. In school, we learned that in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue and discovered America. But Zinn gives us the other side. The Taino people who lived peacefully in the Bahamas were enslaved, tortured, and nearly wiped out within decades of Columbus's arrival. Columbus wrote in his own journal that the native people were kind and would make good servants. Zinn forces us to ask, why do we celebrate this? Why do we have a holiday named after genocide? The Revolutionary War is painted as a heroic uprising for liberty, but Zinn asks, liberty for who? Wealthy elites gained independence from Britain, but poor farmers, enslaved Africans, and Native Americans saw little change. In fact, some black slaves sided with the British because they were promised freedom. That's not the version you usually hear. Zinn shows how even in the fight for freedom, the system protected the powerful. From the 1600s to the 1800s, class struggle ran deep. Workers rebelled, indentured servants revolted, and poor whites joined with freed slaves to fight the elite. But the wealthy found ways to divide them using race, fear, and law. Zinn uncovers how systems of control were carefully crafted to prevent unity among the oppressed. For example, Bacon's Rebellion in 1676. Poor farmers, both white and black, rose up against the colonial elite. Afterwards, laws were passed that hardened racial lines to keep poor whites from ever teaming up with blacks again. The horrors of slavery are often sanitized in school, but Zinn doesn't look away. He gives voice to the enslaved people who resisted, who ran away, fought back, preserved culture, and built networks of survival. He tells us about Nat Turner's rebellion, Harriet Tubman's daring rescues, and how even under brutal conditions, enslaved people didn't just endure, they resisted. And he shows how slavery wasn't just a Southern thing. Northern banks, ships, and industries profited from it too. As America industrialized in the 1800s, new struggles emerged. Immigrants worked 14-hour shifts in dangerous factories for pennies. Children labored in coal mines. When workers demanded rights, they were beaten, fired, or killed. Zinn spotlights forgotten heroes: the strikers at the Homestead Steel Plant, the women at the Lowell Mills, the anarchists of Haymarket. These weren't footnotes. They were the heartbeat of resistance. And yet, history books often skip their names. Zinn doesn't ignore women's roles. He lifts them up. From Native matriarchs to suffragists like Lucy Parsons and labor leaders like Mother Jones, he shows how women fought for both gender and class justice. Writing The History of Women in America is the history of women resisting their assigned place in the hierarchy. It's a battle that's still being fought. Zinn was against war, not out of weakness, but because he knew its human cost. He served in World War II, but later exposed the lies used to justify wars like Vietnam and Iraq. He tells the story of soldiers who refused to fight, of Vietnamese civilians killed, and of anti-war movements that risked everything. He reminds us there is no flag large enough to cover the shame of killing innocent people. We often hear about Martin Luther King Jr., but Zinn tells us about the thousands of forgotten heroes. The kids who faced fire hoses in Birmingham, the freedom riders beaten in the South, Fannie Lou Hamer, SNCC, Malcolm X Rosa Parks wasn't just tired. She was trained and ready. Zinn makes it clear. Change comes from below, from organized, ordinary people, not political speeches alone. Throughout the book, he shows how those in power maintain control using media, education, fear, and division. He explains how elites use the politics of fear during the Red Scare, the war on drugs, and after 9/11s. Fear creates obedience, and obedience maintains the status quo. But truth, when shared, becomes a weapon. Despite all the injustice, a people's history is not hopeless. Zinn believed in resistance, in community, in the power of ordinary people to change the world. He believed that even small acts of rebellion, refusing to sit at the back of a bus, going on strike, telling your real story, could ripple into something huge. His book ends not with despair, but with a call. To be hopeful in bad times is not foolish. It is based on the fact that human history is a history not only of cruelty, but also of compassion, sacrifice, courage, and kindness. Zinn's work was banned in some schools. Politicians called him anti-American. Why? Because he dared to question the myths we were told. Because he empowered people to think critically. He didn't hate America. He loved it enough to demand better from it. That scares people who benefit from silence. Zinn's message echoes louder than ever as we face police brutality, corporate control, voter suppression, and environmental collapse. A people's history gives us context. It helps us ask, who benefits from our silence? Who loses when we forget? Zinn reminds us democracy is not a spectator sport. We have to participate, challenge, speak, resist. History is not neutral. It's political. Real change comes from the bottom up. Silence helps the oppressor, not the oppressed. Education is not about memorizing names and dates. It's about learning how to think. And finally, every generation writes its own history. What will ours look like? As Zinn once said, you can't be neutral on a moving train. The world is moving. The train is moving.